War is an integral feature of human history and of the human condition. For most of us, though, here in the contemporary world, lucky enough to not have to confront the grim realities of war ourselves, it is a distant thought. Though distant as it may be, we are heavily drawn to the idea of war. It fascinates us. Through history books, late-night documentaries, and video games, we are perpetually drawn to stories of battlefield heroism and of strategic brilliance. But behind every maneuver, every charge, and every headline lies a quiet force that makes it all possible. Logistics. As World War II General Omar Bradley once said, "Amateurs talk strategy, professionals talk logistics." In this video, I wish to discuss with you one specific kind of supply: money. War is of course expensive. Feeding troops, producing weapons, moving equipment, it all costs a fortune. And when the money runs dry, nations get creative. For the purposes of this video, one answer shall retain our attention: drugs. The link between drugs and state power runs deep, and in war, these links become even more valuable. Drugs are portable, profitable, and in the chaos of conflict, hard to police. Insurgent groups, regimes under sanctions, and warlords all find narcotics a reliable source of income, fueling both their campaigns and a broader illegal economy. In this two-part series, we'll explore how drugs and warfare collide, how narcotics fund battles, sustain regimes, and shape geopolitics. In this first episode, we turn to the modern Middle East and the story of Captagon, and the role it played in propping up the Assad regime in Syria. The story of Captagon begins in the West German town of Essen in 1961. The pill was originally produced by the company Degussa Pharmagruppe under the name phenytoin. For 25 years, it was used as a milder alternative to amphetamines and was mostly prescribed to treat ADHD, narcolepsy, and depression. However, by 1986, the World Health Organization and the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs described the pill as prone to being abused. It was then listed for international scheduling under the Convention of Psychotropic Substances, and thus became illegal in most countries. So this is it then. Phenytoin was deemed dangerous, it was banned, its production ceased, and now it was soon to be gone. Right? Unfortunately, it was a little too late. Captagon had already started to become popular around the Middle East, and especially in the Arabic Gulf, where it was known as Abu Hilalain, Arabic for Father of the Two Crescent Moons. Now, some of you may be asking, why specifically the Middle East? Well, the popularity of the drug can be explained by two factors. Firstly, taboo. Because the Quran prohibits alcohol, many turn to alternative, such as pills, that are generally seen as more acceptable. Second, versatility. The drug puts its user into a kind of euphoric, energetic state in which sleep and food are not required. Students take it to study longer, partygoers use it for a high, and manual laborers rely on it to stay awake and focused during long, exhausting shifts. As you can imagine, with demand still persisting, supply soon followed. Between the late 80s and 2006, Captagon traffickers had primarily been based in Bulgaria and other neighboring countries. Although Bulgarian authorities had tolerated the practice, they began to crack down on it during the 2000s as a show of good faith for their bid to join the EU. As fate would have it, at around the same time as Captagon production ceased in Europe, another group would continue production. You might have heard of them. Their name is Hezbollah. As you can see on the map, the common trade route of Captagon before 2006 passed through Lebanon and other neighboring countries. Although Lebanon was not the destination, the mere passage of the product through the territory led to what we might call a spillover. This is probably how Hezbollah, primarily present in Lebanon, became familiar with the illicit trade. Furthermore, the conclusion of the Israel-Hezbollah war of 2006 had left the latter with a hole in their finances. Captagon became a good way of making back these losses. Quickly, facilities in the Bekaa Valley sprung up. This was facilitated by Iranian forces, who provided their local allies with the bulk of the synthetic precursors needed to synthesize the drug, thus helping jumpstart this blossoming industry. This shift coincides with increased seizures of Captagon throughout the Middle East, as well as a massive decrease of European share of Captagon production. From a geographic perspective, this evolution makes a lot of sense. Not only was the total distance decreased, but it also removed inspection points where the drug could have been intercepted. But how did this drug end up in the hands of the Assad regime? Well, interestingly enough, the Syrian regime did not wait for Bashar al-Assad or Captagon to become involved in drug smuggling. Indeed, during the Lebanese Civil War between 1971 and 1991, the US State Department had branded Syria as a narco-state, seeing as military, security, and regime figures in Damascus extracted enormous profits from the drug trade that fueled the conflict. One of the main actors in this network was a man called Rafat al-Assad, a powerful army figure and uncle of Bashar al-Assad. However, following the end of hostilities, the Syrian government carried raids on cannabis fields in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, as well as heroin facilities inside of Syria. And by the 1990s, the narcotics industry inside of Syria was largely dismantled. And in 1997, the Clinton administration removed Syria from its narco-state list.
At the hub of this transformation is Damascus, Syria's capital. Described as the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world, it was once the seat of caliphs whose Islamic empire reached from Spain to the borders of China.
In the period that followed, until the beginning of the Syrian civil war in 2011, Syria's role in drug manufacturing had been reduced to one of a transit country, primarily being used as an overland smuggling route for heroin and hashish en route to Europe and Captagon en route to the Gulf markets. However, this was soon to change. In 2011, as protests escalated into a full-blown civil war and Western sanctions hit the country, the economy was soon brought to a standstill. Between 2011 and 2021, Syria's economy shrank by more than 60%, and the value of the Syrian pound plummeted, resulting in over 80% of the population falling below the poverty line. Simultaneously in Lebanon, anti-drug enforcement operations in 2012 led to the closures of several major production centers in the Bekaa Valley, where the bulk of Captagon production had been. Assessments indicate that Captagon production in the Bekaa Valley fell by 90% between 2011 and 2013. This is mainly attributed to a shift in production from Lebanon to Syria. Indeed, within the mix of the chaos that had engulfed Syria starting in 2011, it became very easy to relocate production across the border. By that point, the stage was set for Syria to become a narco-state once more. Although it is hard to accurately understand the events that transpired in the underground economy of a country in the midst of a civil war, a couple of things are certain. Firstly, in the early stages of the Syrian civil war, Captagon laboratories were usually small and scattered across the country, and production was not dominated by a single actor. Rather, there is evidence that multiple groups made use of Captagon trade in order to finance their military operations. This includes the Assad regime, Hezbollah, the Kurds, secular forces, and the Islamic State, who were all either directly involved in the manufacturing of Captagon or benefited from the trade by virtue of taxing smugglers crossing through their borders. It is only by 2018 that production really began to ramp up. By then, Assad had regained control over most of the country. The consolidation of territorial control enabled the Assad regime and its key regional allies to cement their role as the prime beneficiaries of the Syrian narcotics trade. In this regard, two areas were particularly critical to this development. Firstly, the urban and industrial centers of Aleppo, Homs, and Damascus, as well as control over southern Syria, which is where the critical overland route leading to Saudi Arabia and the Gulf markets begins. Indeed, the importance of securing smuggling routes, such as western rural Homs and the western Kalamun mountain, is thought to have been a key motivating factor for efforts to recapture those areas by Syrian government forces. The consolidation of the Syrian territory by the Assad regime coincides with the skyrocketing of global seizures of Captagon. By 2021, Syria counted at least 15 active manufacturing sites, which together accounted for 80% of global Captagon production. Once again, Syria became what experts call a narco-state. Indeed, the regime, and particularly the security apparatus, was completely dependent on the proceeds of this trade to stay afloat and to maintain power over Syria. For reference, each pill cost roughly 50 cents to produce and brought back around $20 to the regime. Although estimates vary significantly, moderate opinion placed the income of the Captagon trade to have been between $3.5 to $5.5 billion per year for the Syrian regime, far exceeding any legal exports. The narcotics trade in Syria operated through a highly organized and state-embedded network in which the security apparatus and regime-linked narco-entrepreneurs played a central role. A New York Times investigation identified Maher al-Assad, the president's brother, and commander of both the elite 4th Armored Division and the Republican Guard, as the key figure behind Captagon production. Supporting him were various branches of the Syrian military and intelligence services, as well as pro-government militias and foreign actors such as Hezbollah and the Russian Wagner Group. Prominent regime-affiliated figures, such as Major General Ghassan Bilal, also right-hand man of Maher al-Assad, served as a key liaison between the regime and Hezbollah in coordinating drug trafficking operations. Moreover, businessmen such as Amer Kiti, Hodr Taher, Mohammed Salish, Taher al-Khayali, and Abdelatif Hami were provided access to state resources, infrastructure, and military protection. They set up their narcotics production facilities in government-sanctioned manufacturing warehouses close to state-owned ports or government-controlled checkpoints, and utilized their networks in local pharmaceutical and agricultural industries, as well as in the black market, to enable and maximize production. Furthermore, they used commercial transportation for smuggling and created shell companies to conceal any links tying the operations to the Assad regime. Bashar al-Assad's cousins Wasim Badia al-Assad and Samer al-Assad are also reportedly involved. Syria's production of Captagon benefited from two strategic elements, one being industrial and the other geographic. Industrially, Syria had been a developed country prior to the war. The good quality of infrastructure, roads, networks, widespread access to electricity, and modern ports made smuggling significantly easier. Furthermore, the manufacturing of Captagon is a relatively simple affair, especially for a country which historically boasts strong national chemical and pharmaceutical industries. The modern infrastructure, paired with the industrial know-how, were crucial in enabling the Assad regime to become the worldwide leaders of Captagon production. The second strategic element is Syria's excellent geography in regards to the drug trade. As we have seen before, Captagon networks existed in Syria prior to 2018, and drug networks at large have existed for decades. That is to say, that the Assad regime did not have to create a network from scratch. Instead, the territorial control simply enabled the regime to exercise a monopoly on the Captagon production and smuggling inside of Syria. And secondly, its geographic proximity to its main export markets, paired with the porous borders shared with Iraq, Lebanon, and Jordan, made the trafficking significantly easier. 5 main smuggling routes have been identified. The northern route, that runs from the north of Syria to the Turkish ports on the Mediterranean coast. The eastern route leading to Iraq. The southern land route that passes through the remote desert region of southern Syria and northwest Jordan into Saudi Arabia. The Kalamun route that goes from the west of Syria to Lebanon, where drugs are then exported either by ship or by air. Fun fact regarding the air route of the Kalamun mountain, if we might call it that. In October 2015, a Saudi royal was arrested for trying to smuggle 40 suitcases of Captagon pills through Beirut International Airport. Now, I'm not sure what his reason is. From my understanding, the Saudi royal family is extremely rich. Maybe he was disowned, maybe he was looking for a thrill. If anyone knows, please let me know, because it truly is a puzzle for me. And lastly, the coastal region of the west of Syria, particularly through the port of Latakia, was also a major hub for export. Often, the sea routes served not as a direct path for traffic to Europe, as the markets of Captagon were mostly in the Middle East and in the Arabic Gulf, but rather as a rerouting exercise aimed at muddying the provenance of the cargo, and thus lowering the possibility that the cargo be intercepted upon entry in the Gulf states. The reason being that cargo in provenance from a European port was less likely to arouse suspicion, in contrast to a shipment originating from Syria. Indeed, by the early 2020s, Syria's neighbors had figured out that the Assad regime was behind these operations. This point of contention later became a bargaining chip for the regime, who by virtue of promising to tackle this problem, were attempting to leverage the health crisis they had created in order for Syria to be welcomed back into the Arab League. This is not to say that there hadn't been signals during 2010s. In fact, there had been plenty. Or that neighboring countries were clueless as to potential links between the Syrian regime and the Captagon trade. But the Assad regime had denied accusations through and through. However, a big bust in 2020 made international headlines and effectively silenced any remaining doubts about Assad's regime involvement. In July of that year, in the Italian port of Salerno near Naples, a boat dispatched from Syria containing 84 million Captagon pills, or $1.1 billion worth of pills, were seized. At first, many suspected the Islamic State to be behind this operation. However, the scale of the shipment suggested a larger scale access to infrastructure and transport. Not only were industrial-scale cardboard cylinders, as well as commercial shipping vessels used to conceal the pills, traced to key regime-aligned business figures, but the consignment of the boat came from the port of Latakia, a port only accessible to the Syrian regime. Following this bust, there remained no doubts in anybody's mind regarding the involvement of the Assad regime in the Captagon trade. Indeed, just 2 years later, in 2022, as Captagon trade reached peak levels of production, the US Senate passed the Captagon Act, aiming to disrupt and dismantle the Syrian narcotics network. As a show of good faith to the international community, they began cracking down on lower-ranking drug smugglers and publicized numbers demonstrating a rise in arrests. However, it would all be in vain. Their neighbors did not believe them. These crackdowns were purely for show. All the main players that enabled these operations to exist were still operating with the blessings of the Syrian regime. Soon, in a lightning offensive, Assad was gone. He called his neighbors for help, but they seemed willing to roll the dice for a new Syria and did not intervene. The new masters of Syria have pledged to eradicate the manufacturing of Captagon. It remains to be seen how events will unfold. Indeed, while Syrian leader Ahmad al-Shara may be sincere in his intentions, the trade involved multiple actors, and not everyone will be ready to forgo the enormous profit the trade generates. One possible scenario is that production will leapfrog from Syria to Lebanon, as has happened in the past. Demand will certainly not disappear, and at a time where Hezbollah has been severely weakened by Israel, it is not far-fetched to imagine that they will gladly soak up the billions in profits generated by the Captagon trade. Sadly, the case of Syria is hardly unique. As we turn to Southeast Asia's Golden Triangle, we find a region where war and narcotics have fed off of each other across decades, still persisting to this day. If you have enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like the video, and drop a comment with your thoughts. All of it is greatly appreciated. See you soon.